You know, when we think about empires conquering new lands, we usually picture armies and brute force. But what if the most powerful weapon wasn't the sword, but paperwork? This is the incredible story of how law was used to, well, legally steal a world.
So let's go back in time. It's 1513. A Spanish conquistador, Vasco Núñez de Balboa, literally wades into the Pacific Ocean. He's got a sword and a banner, and he starts reciting this whole legal formula. He even had a notary there to write it all down. And just like that, he claims the entire ocean and all the lands touching it for Spain. It sounds completely nuts, right? Like something out of a cartoon?
But here's the crazy part. In the eyes of the European powers of the day, this was totally 100% legal. So how? How on earth could a gesture like that actually hold up? Well, that's the puzzle we're going to piece together.
See, Balboa's little stunt wasn't just some guy getting arrogant and carried away. Nope. It was a performance, a carefully scripted legal ritual. And behind that whole show was this massive, sophisticated system, a machine really, built for one purpose, to turn raw violence into legally binding property deeds.
We all learn about the age of exploration in school, and it sounds so noble. Brave adventurers expanding human knowledge and all that. But was it really about discovery? Or was exploration just a nicer word for the first step in a systematic plan for conquest and, let's be honest, looting?
To really get to the bottom of this, we've got to peel back the layers of the myth. We need to look past those famous names we all know and see what was actually going on behind the scenes.
So let's take some of the all-stars of exploration. We call them heroes, but let's check the receipts. Christopher Columbus kicked off the enslavement and mass death of the Taino people. Hernán Cortés sacked the great city of Tenochtitlan for its gold. Francisco Pizarro held an emperor for a massive ransom and then executed him anyway. Vasco da Gama literally bombarded port cities to force them to trade. You see, these aren't just unfortunate side effects of exploration. This was the exploration.
And that leads to this quote, which just hits the nail on the head. To call these men explorers is to participate in the myth. Let us name it clearly. This was conquest. The word explorer wasn't a job title. It was a PR strategy. It was a way to hide what was really happening. But here's the thing. Cortés, Pizarro, and the rest weren't just making this stuff up as they went. No, they were armed with powerful legal ideas. Ideas that were being forged thousands of miles away in the great intellectual centers of Europe. You could almost call them law factories. And we're not talking about new institutions. These were ancient, incredibly respected universities. Bologna, founded way back in 1088. Salamanca, Paris. These places were the epicenters for the study of Roman and church law, and they became absolutely essential cogs in the growing machinery of empire. So what exactly were these law factories producing? Well, they were taking old Roman legal ideas and sharpening them into weapons for a new age. Things like dominium, which is basically the right to own and control property. Then there's jurisdiction, the authority to say, my laws apply here. And the big one, imperium, the absolute power of a king or queen to rule. These three concepts, they were the intellectual toolkit for building an empire. And the people graduating from these universities, they became the bureaucrats, the lawyers, the administrators of empire. Their whole job was to be the middlemen between violence and legitimacy. They took the brutal reality of conquest on the ground and, through the magic of paperwork and legal jargon, turned it into official, state-approved property. Okay, so we have the theory, but how did it actually work in practice? Let's dive into maybe the most bizarre example of this whole system, the specific ritual that literally gave conquistadors a permission slip to steal an entire continent.
The entire legal house of cards was built on this one idea, the doctrine of discovery. It was a principle rooted in theology that said if a land wasn't already occupied by Christians, it was legally considered vacant. Terra nullius, nobody's land, which meant it was free for the taking.
And the main tool used to put this doctrine into action was a truly wild document called the Requerimiento, which just means the requirement. And yep, this is the exact script that Balboa was working from when he claimed the Pacific.
The whole process was just surreal. It was pure theater. The conquistadors would show up, find the people who lived there, and then read this long legal document out loud, often in Spanish to people who obviously had no idea what they were saying. Sometimes they'd just yell it from the deck of a ship to an empty shoreline. This document demanded their immediate submission to a pope and a king they'd never heard of, and if they didn't immediately agree, which of course they wouldn't, they were instantly declared rebels. And boom, that gave the conquerors the legal justification they needed to attack, enslave, and seize everything.
So, as this quote says, it was less an offer of negotiation than a ritual of absolution for violence. It was never about making a deal. It was about creating a legal loophole, a pre-written excuse to justify what they were about to do anyway.
Now, it's easy to think of this as some weird, distant historical artifact. But these ideas didn't just die out with the Spanish Empire. Oh no, they evolved, they adapted, and their DNA is still very much present in our world today.
Take the Spanish Empire versus the later British Empire. Spain's claim to legitimacy was based on religious authority. The Pope basically gave them a divine green light. But the British took a more secular-sounding approach. Their justification was based on property law. They argued that because indigenous peoples weren't farming the land in a European way, they weren't improving it. And if land wasn't being improved, well, it was basically up for grabs.
So you see, the language changed. It went from God and the Pope to property improvement and secular law. But the end goal? It was exactly the same. The whole point was to have a legal system in place that could take an act of violent theft and magically transform it into a legitimate property title.
And believe it or not, the spirit of Balboa's bizarre claim is alive and well today. We're not talking about guys in armor anymore, but think about the massive legal claims being made right now on things we all thought were shared. We're talking about deep-sea mineral rights, huge underground water tables, even who gets to control airspace and satellite orbits. Heck, companies are trying to claim legal ownership over the building blocks of life itself, our DNA. It's the same performance of possession, just with lawyers instead of conquistadors.
And all of this leaves us with a pretty big question to think about. If a legal system could be designed to turn the conquest of a continent into a simple property transaction, what other realities in our own world are being shaped, defined, and maybe even created by the legal language we use every day?